Elizabeth Warren was stopped from reading a letter from Coretta Scott King, and I thought it was tasteless. It's like, what's lost by her reading this freaking letter? Like, even if she reads the letter, it's not going to change the result. I mean, like, the result's pretty much in stone at this point. There's nothing lost by this at all, and I don't get it. So I find myself, just like thinking, boy, like, what are you doing? What's the rub here? And then I heard this interview on Morning Joe with Senator John Thune. John Thune.
Joining us from Capitol Hill, Chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee and Chairman of the Senate Republican Conference,
turned me around.
Senator John Thune of South Dakota. Mike Barnacle and Yahoo's Bianca Golodriga, both back with us as well. Good to have you on board, Senator.
Senator, always great to have you here. You met who may be the next justice to the Supreme Court. What do you think?
Extremely well qualified, great legal mind, and that's pretty universal, Joe, on both sides of the aisle. I think it'll be very hard for Democrats to block his confirmation, and I think the president made an outstanding choice.
Bianca, it's sort of, you listen to Senator Thune, who has a very, first of all, great knowledge of the situation, every right to say that. Republicans are in power. Democrats have to pick their fights at this point. I'm not sure this is the one.
And Democrats really seem to be divided over how far they're willing to fight over Judge Gorsuch. And
yeah, it's because they're dumbasses. Because look, Barack Obama was stopped for, what was it, 6 months? Maybe longer, from even having a hearing on Merrick Garland, and the fact that you wouldn't pull out every step to stop them, the Republicans, from having a hearing, it's another sign of incompetence by the Democratic Party. Tit for tat. If you're going to stop our guy, we're going to stop your guy. This is ridiculous.
Whether or not this is a moral issue they're just fighting for, but as the senator said, you would like to avoid the nuclear option if possible. What lengths are you willing to go in hopes of avoiding it? And what's the cutoff point?
We'll make sure that this judge gets confirmed to the Supreme Court. We're hopeful that will be with the involvement of Democrats. We hope that they don't filibuster this nominee. That's not been the tradition for Supreme Court nominees, at least certainly not in modern history. And so
it's also not tradition for the vice president to be the tiebreaker for cabinet seats, but he just did it. It's also not tradition for a guy with no political or military experience to be president of the United States. We did that. Why the hell wouldn't they filibuster? Just me.
We hope that Democrats, although they may ultimately vote against him and oppose him, will allow him, when the process concludes, to get an up and down vote. Anybody who has met with him can't help but be impressed with not only his knowledge, his insights. He's somebody who's written some really sharp, crisp legal opinions, and he'll be a very independent judge on the court who will judge with impartiality. And that's really, I think, what most Americans want to see, somebody who will call balls and strikes on the Supreme Court.
Senator Thune, it's Willie Geist. It's good to see you as always this morning. I want to ask you about the scene that played out, and we've been talking about this morning on the floor of the Senate when Elizabeth Warren was cut off from debate as she read a letter from Coretta Scott King for impugning, Mitch McConnell said, the colleague Senator Sessions. You voted for that to go forward. What is the argument to not allow Senator Warren to speak or at least finish what she was saying on the floor?
Willie, it was a clear violation of the rules, and the rules say directly or indirectly impugning the character or conduct of another colleague, and she clearly had done that. She crossed that line. She'd been warned before, and so this was simply, I think, the whole message behind this was that the Senate's a place where collegiality is supposed to rule. There are rules. We're supposed to abide by those rules. When those rules are not adhered to, people need to be called out. And like I said, this is not a first-time incident. This was something that she had been warned about before. And typically what happens when members are warned about something they've said, they heed that warning. But this was impugning the character of a colleague,
Senator.
in this case Jeff Sessions, who most of us who served with him understand and know he's a man of absolute integrity.
Senator, you've been there a while. You know well you've heard much worse on the floor of the Senate. People saying
thank you very much, Willie.
In the course of a debate. Was that really
thank you very much, Willie.
worthy of shutting down what she was saying?
Well,
Thank you very much.
You can make a judgment, Willie, about whether or not you ought to invoke the rule, but it was a clear violation of the rules. And again, it's not something this isn't a first-time occurrence. This has happened before. And the language that was used in that attack, in that letter, was something that very much was a direct attack on Jeff Sessions. And this is one of those circumstances where you understand the Senate is a collegial place, but most of us like to think of it as we're all part of a team, and when one of your team members gets attacked, you typically defend them, and that's simply what happened last night.
Do you really think that reading a letter from Coretta Scott King and Kennedy is an attack? I mean, Elizabeth Warren, I've seen her on the attack, and she can own her attacks, but she wasn't. She was reading a letter.
Mika's making sense.
Somebody who's an icon in history.
Shocking.
Right, and it was a letter from 31 years ago, Mika, and it was a direct attack on, at that time, Jeff Sessions, who was up for a federal judgeship. But I don't think there's any question that it was a violation of the rules. And again, whether or not you want to enforce the rules is a judgment call that's made. But when the issue was raised, it was raised the parliamentarian. The parliamentarian who serves as the referee in the Senate said very clearly this is a violation of the rules. And again, I mean, the Senate is a place where decorum is supposed to rule. It's one of the few places in the world where you can actually have, or at least be able to have, a civilized debate. And so the attempt to rein in members who, whether it's indirect, reading a letter, or direct attack, who are violating those rules, I think it's just, that's one of those things that the Senate ought to be known for. And I think, frankly, it's unfortunate that there weren't more Democrats who would step up and acknowledge that was crossing a line as well.
He's just being a dick. I can't think of a better way to put it. What the fuck? So it was just a dick move. Because, as was said previously, much worse has been said on the Senate floor. I didn't realize that was the rationale, and it is stupid, and all it does is raise Elizabeth Warren's profile. Which I just letting her read, and it's so the worst way to handle protesters. The worst way to handle a protester is to go tear gas them and to arrest people and to treat them like shit. Because you know what happens when you treat protesters like shit? You raise the profile of the protest. People start wondering, what are they protesting for? What the fuck is wrong with you? I mean, you guys suck.